Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we say hello to David Tuite. Hello, how are you doing, David?
Hey, Eric, I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for joining. So what we want to talk about today is developer portals and specifically Backstage, because there seems to be a lot of kind of demand for this, and portals are important since more and more APIs are around. So tell us a little bit how you got into this space. I think you have a very interesting story in terms of how your own developer portal story evolved.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It started for me about 6 years ago. I was hired as a software engineer in Workday, which is a global HR technology company. And I was hired to be the first developer on a deployment tool UI that they were building inside the company. So this was a uh, virtualization platform built on OpenStack, and the kind of virtualization piece was there already, and they wanted a UI on top so that people inside the company could easily deploy their things into OpenStack. And so I got that started. It was originally just a deployment UI. And then over time, it grew into a service catalog and developer portal. So, once we got the virtualization layer started inside Workday, we found that people like to use it. And that led to the creation of lots of different services inside the company. Workday is traditionally a very monolithic architecture. But once new services started to spring up, we started to realize that it was becoming difficult to understand what they were, who owned them, why we had these things. And so we started kind of like the simple journey that a lot of companies go on, where they create a spreadsheet and they list their services down, inside the spreadsheet, different
Excel,
columns
right?
across the
That's
top.
like, what
Yeah,
will the world be without Excel?
exactly. I've seen these things all over the place. And eventually we realized that the spreadsheet was just constantly out of date. Nobody really trusted it. It was copied around the place and couldn't tell which was the real spreadsheet. And so we decided to build a service catalog into the deployment tool that I had created when I started the company originally. And that became our developer portal inside Workday.
And I think the path that you are just talking about is a path that I also see all the time, right? There are these like attempts to keep track of things internally. Of course, in the beginning, you kind of do it with a low effort, and then you realize, well, maybe it's not quite good enough, and then like the pain is growing. So with the growing pain and then the growing needs, like what was your next step in your journey towards Roadie?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of the right way to do it. You don't want to over optimize for this problem before you actually have it. And we probably grew to about 30 to 40 services before we even started that spreadsheet. So you can go quite a way with basic tools here, but we're seeing now that more companies are having more microservices. It's getting easier to put things into production, and so more companies are having this problem. But so we created this developer portal inside Workday, and I was quite interested in it from a business perspective. I thought it was solving some interesting problems inside the company. At this point, I was now a product manager, so I had a bit of a different lens on things. And I could see the problem existed at every company I talked to. So, I would talk to friends inside other companies, Zendesk and Stripe and other places. And it seemed like everybody was basically building one of these things themselves inside their company. And nobody really wanted to do it, right? It doesn't, do anything for your end customers. They don't care if you've got a developer portal or not. But yeah, here we all were rebuilding the same thing and reinventing the wheel. And so I decided then in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic in 2020 to quit my job in Workday and try and start a company that would help other organizations get access to a developer portal and service catalog.
Yeah, I think that was a smart move. And like you said, I have had the same experience. Pretty much every organization that I talk to, and I typically talk to bigger organizations, right? But by now I can probably just walk in there and ask them, like, show me your homegrown developer portal, please. And they will have something because, yes, at some point in time, they decided that would be good. So they build it and then they realize, it's not that trivial to do. And it's hard to keep it up to date, right? So all these things. So now that you decided, okay, this is a problem that a lot of companies seem to deal with, and maybe they don't want to solve it themselves, what was your next step then, starting Roadie and thinking about how to best do that?
Yeah, so The kind of surprising thing that happened to me as I was trying to get this company off the ground back in April 2020 was, and this was like quite a scary moment for me. But I was doing research in the space. I was actually having conversations with venture capitalists trying to raise money for the company. It was quite close to doing a few deals, and then I realized that Spotify were about to open source my entire product vision in the form of Backstage. So I just fortuitously came across this one day, and my first reaction was, "Oh, this is terrible."
Okay, yeah, done here.
As you can imagine, I've just walked away from my job, and there's going to be an open source product that does exactly what I was planning on building. So, but I could see the vision that Spotify had. Backstage has an incredible pedigree there, and has solved some of the same problems that we were solving inside Workday. So I kind of understood the direction it was going to take. I talked to some of the people inside Spotify, and their goal ultimately is to drive massive adoption of Backstage. And Spotify is a hirer of engineering talent, incredible engineering talent, right? Especially in the machine learning space. And so Backstage helped them get that message out to the world and show that, look, we're a company who can build great open source software. And they just want a big adoption of that. So they were happy to have a commercial entity operating in the space. And so I kind of figured out after my initial panic subsided that instead of building my own proprietary solution to compete with Backstage, I was better off adopting this community and trying to help Backstage be as big as it could be in my own way.
Mm-hmm. Just out of curiosity, because I find that space fascinating, did you have to negotiate, so to speak, with Backstage at some point, or did you just look at the license and basically the license told you, oh, that's fine, and you could just move on?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's open sourced under Apache 2. It was donated to the CNCF in 2020, quite early in the journey. So it's currently in the sandbox stage. And it should be in incubation quite soon if all things go to plan. And it was very important to me from the start that we didn't just kind of leech off the project, right? So we've always contributed as much as we can back to the community, the open source community around Backstage. We've built a ton of Backstage plugins ourselves. Done a lot of work in the open source project. Spotify are still the primary drivers of the open source project, but we're contributing as much as we can for a small company. And so the community is just very important to us, and we're trying to help out there as much as we can. So it's kind of like, I think ultimately the community decides whether or not you can exist in the space. And so it's very important to do the right thing there and really stand by the community.
Yep, that is certainly, I think, a lesson that you can learn from a lot of open source projects you could see over the years, right? It's like if there's no momentum carrying it forward, it'll just wither and die at some point.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things I find interesting about Backstage is that Backstage has this idea of it is a portal that also does what you did, which is setting up kind of scaffolding for developers. And it also relies on a catalog, which catalog is either fed, I think, by those services that you actually create or by externally ingested services. Right? So what's the model that you see most companies using when it comes to managing and populating that catalog? Because managing the catalog itself, that's kind of out of the scope of Backstage, right?
Well, yeah. So discovery of the things that go into the catalog is largely outside the scope. Backstage is driven by these YAML files, which describe the services which exist inside the company. And I should really say software there instead of services, because it can cover much more than just kind of back-end services. So, but as long as those YAML files exist and can be consumed by Backstage, then you can put them pretty much wherever you want and use them to describe whatever you want inside your company. So that cataloging aspect is one half of really what Backstage does. And so companies do come to us looking to help improve discoverability, effectiveness, productivity inside the company, and they see Backstage as a way to do that. The other half of what Backstage does, and that some companies are interested in, is around improving production operability, maturity, kind of homogeneity. And the scaffolder the scaffolder feature of Backstage is the way that you will do that using Backstage. So what it does typically is take a predefined template from a known location that a company will define themselves, and then it will pass some variables into it to create a new code base, put it on GitHub, and then run some actions on it, maybe like hooking it up to your monitoring tool, hooking it up to your CI system, your logging infrastructure. And the idea with this is that it helps teams get started creating new services more quickly, but also these templates come with the best practices of your organization built into them, and they automatically hook your new services up to the infrastructure tools that they need to be able to operate successfully. And so you end up with better production consistency and maturity while moving faster. So that's a kind of a compliance and reduced time to value story, which is the other half of what Backstage does.
Yeah, and that automation part, I think, is really important nowadays, because people are looking for more and more automated stuff, right? And I think that automation story then becomes something that people are also very interested in. Now, when we prepared for this interview, we talked a little bit about the customers that you have. So Roadie, you do basically Backstage as a service, right? As I see it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, judging from your customer base, right? Like, where do you see the biggest emphasis that your customers are putting on Backstage, why they are looking at it and why they are adopting it? What's their main value proposition that they see in Backstage?
Yeah, so for our customer base, the story is mostly around the discoverability end of things. So, companies are seeing large amount of growth inside their organizations around the number of services that they have, the number of engineers that they have. A lot of tech companies are growing quite quickly at the moment. Remote work is making it more difficult for companies to kind of discover tooling and discover services inside their organizations. And then it's just getting easier to create things. So serverless and low code and all these other trends are making it easier to create new things. And so just answering basic questions like, do we have a geocoding API, or where are the tests for the X service, are quite difficult to answer in a lot of cases and can require, multiple days of jumping through Slack, talking from one person to the next person. And then, so that's even to just answer the basic question around, like, whether or not we have a certain service, right? The next thing is like, how do I use it, or what's its API? How do I connect to it? Is it stable? Is somebody actually maintaining this thing? All of this information is rather opaque in a lot of organizations. And so companies want to improve that story so that they can move more quickly, be more productive, be more effective, and just have happier engineers.
The one thing I'm wondering about is, if you look at, what you're talking about makes a lot of sense, right? Making things more visible and stuff, that's definitely something that a lot of companies want to do, and they want to help that more things are getting created. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a conflicting thing. But the thing I'm wondering about is, there's one aspect of making this information available, but then the other aspect of actually compiling it. Right? How do I even learn about the things? How do I have an up-to-date picture of what's going on if I do not have a centralized place where everything gets developed and deployed? How is that aspect typically handled in the cases that you've seen?
Yeah, so well, there's a couple of aspects to that. The first is the kind of data completeness and correctness inside Backstage. So that's a very important thing, and it's actually where a lot of service catalogs fall down. And I've talked to numerous companies who have tried to build their own thing internally and have faced this problem where it goes out of date just the way a spreadsheet does. And so that when they hear Spotify's success story with Backstage, they're kind of amazed at how they've managed to pull that off. And really, like, the answer to that when it comes to Backstage, and a bit of this is theory, and Backstage is still relatively new in the open source world, and so we're still kind of figuring parts of this out, is the developer portal on top of the service catalog. So a standalone service catalog can go out of date quite quickly, but a developer portal is a UI into that service catalog, which actually gets used in a lot of cases every day by the engineering organization. And so when people are browsing this UI and using it to do things like look at documentation, look at API specs, figure out who the owner for a particular service is, they tend to notice quite quickly when things are stale. And then Backstage makes it easy for the source of truth to be updated. And so this kind of creates pressure on the service catalog to be correct. And then that's what keeps it generally complete and correct. And then the second aspect of that is like the window it gives into your the operations inside your company. So, Spotify have done a great job of producing important plugins like the Kubernetes plugin for Backstage, which can show you not only what services have we got, but where are they running, how many pods have we got, are things stable in production, what version of this is in the staging environment if you have one of those. And so, all of these use cases add up to create a lot of eyeballs on Backstage inside a company, and then that drives the correctness of the data structure.
So to me, that part was really fascinating that we were talking about. It's like in part there's this social mechanism, so to speak, coming into play, where once you actually help people to use that data, they will help you to fix it. And I think that makes sense.
Teams have this natural desire for their things that they build to be used. And so, when I was working at Workday, for example, we built a deployment tool, and we created a website for it. We had pictures of the team up there. We had an API spec. We had some documentation for people who wanted to get started with the service. And we did this because we didn't want to just produce a service which nobody used inside the company. We wanted to market our own things to the rest of the organization. And Backstage really is a natural place for teams to do that. And so we see inside the companies that we work with, we see surprising organic growth in terms of teams putting their own services and APIs and libraries even into the catalog, because they want people to discover them and they want people to use them.
I think that's also a good point. It's like productizing everything, even internally, right? And I think that's also a big trend that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the insights into like where Backstage is going. So I'm wondering, if you look at Backstage, you are very close to what Backstage is doing and how it's evolving. So what do you see as kind of the next big developments, or maybe the next big stages for Backstage coming along?
Yeah, so I mean the Backstage core team updated the roadmap in January of this year to kind of point out the direction that they were planning on going. The next big milestones will be firstly reaching the incubation stage with the CNCF. Probably not too far away from that. It's one of the most successful sandbox projects. And along with that comes the 1.0 release of Backstage. So a lot of stability improvements, a lot of kind of learnings of the last 2 years being baked into the project, so that new organizations can get started a bit more quickly. Probably improvements to the maintainability of a Backstage deployment inside an organization as well. So it's a pretty exciting time right now. I think the focus is on stability, reliability, and really just making sure that Backstage is rock solid for organizations that want to adopt it.
And one last question I have for Roadie. So how are things going at Roadie? Where do you think Roadie is going? Where are you size-wise? It's like what does your trajectory look like?
Yeah, so right now we are 10 people in total, distributed throughout Europe in various different countries. We have a number of customers listed on our website, many of them who are in various stages of adopting Backstage and driving it through their organizations, adding their docs, adding their API specs, getting their services in there. And so far, we've seen a lot of success with this kind of model. So our primary value at this point is that we help organizations get set up with Backstage really, really quickly, often reducing what might be a number of weeks down to a short number of hours. And then we help with the operability, maintenance of Backstage and the support. And so it's been quite successful so far. I've been quite surprised. I mean, to be honest, when I quit my job at Workday, I thought, I'll give this startup thing a go for about 6 months, and then I'll just go get another job.
Look for another job. Okay.
No, honestly, that's kind of what I was thinking, and everything has been easier than I expected up to this point. We've been growing quite quickly, and everything's looking healthy.
I think you picked a great space. You also picked a great time, right? I think with even with COVID, right, making clear that organizations have to be more adaptive and all of this. I mean, the API space, I think, will keep growing at a quite amazing pace for a number of years. So I think the need for finding things and documenting them will go up. I think.
I think the last kind of 10, 15 years of software development and engineering effectiveness has really been about abstraction tools and creating new platforms and figuring out the best practices for building things. and it's left us with a lot of sprawl, let's say. I mean, kind of a negative word. I don't really mean it to be that negative, but there's about 15 different serverless platforms out there at the moment, and you could deploy your thing on any one of them. And so things can be anywhere, and there can be a lot of things in a given production environment. And so something needs to kind of put its arms around that complexity and really simplify it so that we can be more effective. So yeah, you're right. Great time and a great space.
And the term sprawl, I think, is actually now kind of picking up a little bit, and people using it, talking about API sprawl and these kind of things. Where I also think it's like, no, it's a good thing, right? You just have to manage it, but it's like let 1,000 flowers bloom, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. I mean, each of those things is probably useful in its own way, and really discoverability of them is where we need to focus next.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I really think that both the model that you have, the general space, and also Backstage in itself are really interesting things to have an eye on. And like I said, I think you have a good time ahead of you. So wishing you all the best. Thanks for joining. Thanks for your insight. And well, maybe we can talk about how big Roadie has become a year from now or something like that.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back and tell you how successful we've been.
Okay, great. Thanks for your time. Bye, everybody. Bye, David. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you.